Hi, everyone. Welcome to Ken Shoulders number 7. And we always have to thank Chris Beskar for giving us this information. Ken Shoulders was Chris Beskar's business partner. So today we're going to go through a couple more of Ken Shoulders' papers and a letter that was written to Ken Shoulders from Richard Feynman. And, and then we've got a couple other cool things at the end. So thanks, Brendan, for reading, and you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Eddie. Hi, everyone. So I'll just read through these documents that Eddie sent me. Okay, so this first one is a letter to Ken Shoulders from Richard Feynman, who was a Nobel Prize winner in physics. I think he was about 19 years old when he was on the Manhattan Project. So the youngest physicist there, as far as I
Wow.
know.
Did you say
Okay,
19 years old?
he
Sorry,
was
Brendan.
19 years old when he was on when he joined the Manhattan Project at the end during the Second World War.
Wow,
I think I read somewhere in one of the books about him that he was the youngest physicist at the time on the project.
that's something. Wow, very significant.
Okay, so and as regards physicists, I mean physicists' favorite among physicists, what I heard a statistic was that the favorite physicists are like Schrodinger, Einstein, and Feynman. If you ask for the most physicists will tend to go for those three. I mean, obviously they go for other ones as well, but the majority, I
Yeah.
think, is Einstein, Schrodinger, and Feynman. Okay, so this letter is from the California Institute of Technology, Charles Lorenstein Laboratory of High Energy Physics. Date January 31st, 1986. To Dr. Ken R. Shoulders, Institute for Advanced Studies, Austin, Texas. Dear Dr. Shoulders, when you were in my office, I could not see how 10 to the 10 or 10 to the 11 electrons could be kept as a ball in a vacuum without ions. So I was skeptical and didn't let you tell me about them. I must apologize for it I must apologize for it has come to my attention that it is indeed possible. In the uniform magnetic field, a group of electrons rotating at the Lama precession frequency, omega equals charge of an electron, B field, B over, I think that's Lm. Lm. I think M might be mass, L might be some length or something. I don't know what that is. So omega equals EB divided by Lm. So I'll just read that again. In a uniform magnetic field, a group of electrons rotating at the Lama precession frequency, omega equals EB over Lm, feel from the point of view of an observer rotating with them, a force towards the axis, which would in size be equal to the centrifugal force expected from this rotation. M omega squared R. So M is mass, omega squared is angular velocity squared, R radius, but directed inward. Then an electric quadrupole could be used to hold them by repulsion along the axis. As long as the force away from the axis generated by the quadrupole does not exceed the previously noted confining force from the magnetic field. By adjustment of the size of the quadrupole field, the forces of confinement can be made equal in all directions, just as if there were a density of ions in a vacuum and a rotating sphere of charge is possible. The size seems to be governed by the electric field available without breakdown, but it looks like a reasonable possibility. Sorry, I'll read that again. The size seems to be governed by the electric field available without breakdown, but it looks like a reasonable possibility is 2 times 10 to the 11 electrons in a magnetic field of several hundred Gauss. Now that I understand how it might work, should be glad to discuss it again anytime you wish. My informant was the physicist Curtis Michael, Michelle, I think that's Curtis Michelle, who told me that ions were confined this way at the Bureau of Standards. Ions are easier. The electric field needed is less than B. B is the magnetic density, magnetic flux density. B less than B can be raised to say 15,000 Gauss. So Gauss is a measure of magnetic field intensity, magnetic flux density. It's sometimes it's Tesla, so Gauss is a different unit. It's the same thing as Tesla, but different unit. Some work of this kind was started 10 years ago at UCSD by a Professor M. I forget the full name. But at first, the phenomena seen were not understood. I again apologize for my skepticism, which prevented me from hearing about something very interesting. Sincerely, R.P. Fainham.
Yeah, so this is a letter from Richard Phelan to Ken Shoulders, basically apologizing for not listening to him about charge clusters. We just kind of wanted to bring it up again. We've talked about it before, but it just goes to show how important Ken Shoulders' research really was. So yeah, we can go into the next stuff there, Brendan. Thank you for that.
That's this one, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah.
See? I think I'll make that bigger. So 200, is that too big? Oh, that's too big. It's got 150. Okay. I think that's okay. Okay, so this document is titled Electric Charge Non-Conservation, Ken Shoulders, 2006. An EVO structure, whether in the white or black state, provides an easily measured and unambiguous testimony to the fact that electric charge is not conserved under the conditions of space modification provided by the EVO. Many papers by the author available for download from this site here, which I don't think works. One of our Facebook group guys tried it and it didn't work, so it might work, it might not. From this website, show the means of making these measurements while the EVO state is in control of electron containment. The subject of charge conservation is an old one, where many views have been used for its theoretical analysis, but for the sake of brevity, only one recent reference will be cited here. This reference and abstract is Physical Review D 71025007, 2005. And the title is Lorentz Invariance Violation and Charge Non-Conservation, a General Theoretical Frame for Extensions of the Maxwell Equations. Okay, and it's by these people here.
In Germany, yeah. Mexico,
So,
California.
okay. All quantum gravity approaches lead to small modifications in the standard laws of physics, which in most cases lead to violations of Lorentz invariance. One particular example is the extended standard model SME. Here a general here a general phenomenological approach for extensions of the Maxwell equations is presented, which turns out to be more general than the extended standard model, and which covers charge non-conservation CNC. 2. The new Lorentz invariance violating terms cannot be probed by optical experiments, but need instead the exploration of the electromagnetic field created by a point charge or a magnetic dipole. Some scalar tensor theories and higher dimensional brane theories predict charge non-conservation in 4 dimensions, and some models violating special relativity have been shown to be connected to charge non-conservation. Its relation to the Einstein equivalence principle has been discussed. Because of this upcoming interest, the experimental status of electric charge conservation is reviewed. Excuse me. Up to now, there seem to exist no unique tests of charge conservation. Charge non-conservation is related to the precession of polarization, to a modification of the 1 equals R Coulomb potential. Is that minus there? Is that 1 R minus, or is it just 1 equals R? It might be a minus, I'm not sure. So 1 equals R Coulomb potential, and to a time dependence of the fine structure constant. This gives the opportunity to describe a dedicated search for charge non-conservation. The authors in this reference suggest a dedicated search for charge non-conservation be initiated, whereas the present author suggests one has already been found that completely resolves the issue experimentally without the usual decades of time required to thrash out the answer collegially. Using EVO, so EVOs are exotic vacuum objects.
Yeah.
EVOs are exotic vacuum objects. Using EVO methods, charge can be transported across great distances and through numerous barriers without either having to account for a return current loop or unwanted charging of the source. Transported charge is found only on the object. The very penetrating black EVO is awakened. So I'll read that again. The transported charge is found only on the object. The very penetrating black EVO is awakened within by becoming adequately excited during transit. If the black EVO is not excited adequately, there are indications that the charge it was composed of disappears from our cognizance, if not completely.
Wow. That's pretty interesting when they
Electric
start
charge
talking about.
non-conservation. Your 30th of December 2006. Okay.
So, Ed, if I might ask a question here, while Brendan sets up the next slides.
Do you want to set up the next one? Do you want to ask it on this one? Do you want me to put this one up?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so it would seem that Richard Feynman struggled with where the implosive compression goes in a vortical system. Einstein didn't believe it. As you know, he struggled with that. You listen to Dan Winter, and he's very clear about that. And Einstein can never figure out where this vortical implosive compression went. So as a result, they could never understand the centripetal force.
Right.
And of course, Dan Winter pronounces centripetal, drives me nuts. It's pronounced centripetal and blah, blah, blah. But nonetheless, they're struggling with a view from the 1880s promulgated by Einstein, who refused to believe that you could have this compression effect occur in a vortical superfluid as in the quantum vacuum.
Yeah.
And they're trying to figure out how to use a four-cornered quadrupole Lorentz force to contain this, when in effect, it is self-assembling and self-containing itself. If you understand that charge compression is non-destructive when it goes through Planck, creating that longitudinal field.
Yeah.
That to me is the single greatest breakthrough, I think, in understanding this thing. And according to Dan Winter, he will say that Einstein was on the verge of fully grasping and understanding that. So in the background of all this conversation Ken Shoulders is producing here, he's looking for a way to support the stability of these charge clusters. Is a Coulomb force, extractive Coulomb force, what is stabilizing this thing? And he's indicating that, yes, this centripetal force collapsing along this axis he's referring to is in effect. So I find it very interesting and very, an excellent correlation with what Dan Winter says. And they're looking at the centripetal mechanism to stabilize this, not just the EVOs, but everything that's in this engine room that converts shearing electromagnetic fields into longitudinal compressional distribution.
Yeah. And as Ryan was saying, as we spin them up, the structures become bigger and bigger. By the time they get to ball lightning, they're actually quite stable to the course of, even a few minutes, perhaps, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, very, very interesting stuff for sure.
So that indicates to me that transition veil between classical physics and nanophysics at the Planck level.
Yeah, or also known as subquantum kinetics.
Subquantum kinetics, SQK.
Physics. Yeah.
That there is an interaction across that veil. Now, I use the veil very, very generically here, right?
Yeah.
You would have to see stability at the nanoscale physical level in the subquantum fields to have stability or apparent relationships that we see at the macro physical level, at the electron level.
Yeah.
So there is reciprocity in terms of resonance and coherence and stability controlled by some foundation based on etherons, Turing waves, and everything else at the base of this whole thing.
Yeah.
Both sides of the veil have to see each other in a sense. And so that's why the ball lightning forms. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger because it's self-stabilizing on the other end at the Planck level.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, doing the math for that and doing the experiments for it, whiskey tango foxtrot, that's best of luck. But, that's the current thinking. I believe that's the current thinking.
Yeah, and I think looking towards the Russians' torsional physics is actually going to open up the key to all this, along with he talked about precession there, and I would suggest that when you phase lock the precession, all kinds of magical things can start happening as well too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right, Brendan. The next one is what's an EVO? So this is good general information. Let's see. And I haven't read through these yet, actually. So this is interesting to kind of learn on the go here.
Okay, so the title of this page is what's an EVO? Exotic EVO is exotic vacuum object by Ken Shoulders. Intent of this writing, an EVO, exotic vacuum object, is just another name in a long line of names for a new electronic effect. In the past, it has been called an EV, electromagnetic vortex, or electrum validum for strong electrons. Charge cluster. This could be just a piece of dirt with no net charge. And CCT for charge cluster technology. Whatever it is called, the effect can best be characterized by how it is measured using instruments capable of interpretation in terms of somewhat similar phenomena. The nearest class of instruments with useful capabilities is those used for measuring the properties of electrons and ions. Using these, we will assemble a series of observations characterizing the observable entity properties that are most pertinent to new energy and propulsion uses. Use of contemporary buzzwords like zero-point energy, space energy, or ether, and other areas of mystery will be avoided here, as they might falsely bias judgment of the true events being measured. It will not even be assumed that the entity being interrogated is an assembly of electrons, even though electrons were put in during formation and an equivalent number of electrons were output at the time of dishevelment. This writing is thus an attempt to analyze the actions and basic characteristics of the entity while being as free as possible of preconceived notions about its structure. This aim is heavily biased towards the entity's use instead of its name or theory of operation. They are forceful. A witness plate is a target for the entity that can be taken out of the apparatus and examined for interaction with the entity. Although one would naively assume all effects derived from receiving the impact of the strike would be thermal, experience has shown that this is strictly not so. Many of the effects are an entirely different form of non-thermal material dishevelment due to the particular properties of the bombarding entity. One of the effects that can still be trusted is the measurement of peak force against the witness plate, as certain measurement methods can be arranged that do not directly involve the entity. By using these methods, it can be ascertained with certainty that the peak force due to encountering an entity being measured has easily surpassed the tensile strength limits of the witness plate. When calculations are done to see what the energy balance is to produce the impact mark, using input measured electron number and velocity, it is clear that the effects seen are not traceable due to inertia. Ballistic laws are strictly not followed and are off by a factor of thousands. As an example, an entity traveling at 0.1 times the speed of light, composed of about 10 to the 12 electrons, accelerates a slug of mass 50 material measuring 20 micrometers in diameter by 100 micrometers long, a mean velocity of about 10 to the 7 centimeters per second. Indications are that a very high force is available due to motion of the entity, and that this force is directly indicated by this measurement technique. As a second point of verification of this enormous force, along with another peculiar property of material entrainment, is the way a simple electrical impedance mismatch can reverse the direction of travel for the entity along with the entire load of material it is carrying. This happens when the entity of a particular energy or type creates a hole in a target boring material, such as silicon. Is that silicon carbonate or something? Such as SiC, silicon carbonate or something like that. I don't know if it's that.
Carbide. Yeah.
Carbide, silicon carbide, backed with a metal foil that is in turn spaced from another anode material. This mismatch produces an intense point flash of light having a diameter of about 5 micrometers, resulting from the reversal of the entity with its load, followed by high velocity injection of the load material in the opposite direction originally traveled by the ensemble. Not only is the force of the entity high in the forward and or original direction it was launched, but also it almost instantly reverses direction and applies the force in the opposite direction, all under electrical control afforded by the local structure instead of external dictates. The magnitude of the control voltage has not been directly measured due to the very short time involved, but is not expected to be above the 100-volt range, as assessed from the lack of thin film dielectric breakdown when the film is less than 1,000 atoms thick. The data and photos discussed in the above two photographs can be seen in the paper entitled Charge Clusters in Action by Ken Shoulders. This paper is available for download from the website here. So we don't know if this website may not be working. So just,
Yeah.
So so
Yeah. These papers are amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding.
Just incredible.
And thanks again, Chris Beskar, for all of this information. Wow. Yeah, that's it, Brendan. You got it.
this entity is thus more forceful than any condensed material can withstand, and it is controlled by a minute amount of input power. They hang together. In order to array adequate quantities of this specialized electronic substance for the purpose of propelling large quantities of material and for generation of high-powered electrical and light sources, it is necessary for the entities to form into these large structures without the adverse effects of space charge repulsion. They do this admirably, as can be seen from the photos of witness plates that caught them in flight and recorded their binding arrangement just before capture. Examples of this can be seen in the paper entitled Permittivity Transitions by Ken Shoulders, also available for download from the web at the above address.
And we're going to go through that paper at some point. I have that. Yeah.
This demonstration of cohesiveness must be taken to the next step of reducing the velocity of the ensemble and collecting more material while also allowing a cooling action to occur. which removes rogue modes that do not control as desired. This is a purification step, and the pull type of electrodynamic trap is ideally suited to the purpose. Once the accumulation and cooling is complete, the material is transferred to the operational site. In the case of a single-axis bidirectional thruster or propulsion unit, this device can be as simple as a sealed pair of parallel plates of dielectric material, having a spacing of a single unit of charged material between them, about 0.001 inches, with conductive electrodes applied on the outside to present the control field. Electrical and optical generators are essentially the same structure, with specialized electrodes and filling to enhance the motional aspect of the contained charge. In many ways, these devices closely parallel piezoelectric devices, but having exceptionally high coupling coefficients and efficiency in that they are over unity efficiency, are self-driven and function without input power from our usual sources.
Wow, what a statement.
Why would they act this way? There are several unique properties to the portion of space we occupy on this planet and nearby neighborhood. One of the most obvious curiosities is the way we have reached a charge neutral or charge balanced condition, with the exception of an occasional thunderstorm, fracto emission, cracked rock, and rubbing hair on amber. The driving force behind this is that electrons really don't want to be alone. In the first opportunity available, they join up with something. In the case of elements, they readily join the nucleus with its positive charge invitation until a balance is obtained.
Wow.
Oddly enough, and this is not common knowledge, they also join each other as long as the spacing is as close as one atomic diameter or so. That is what happens when an abrupt high field process, like a gas discharge or field emission, forcibly ejects electrons from a conductor at sufficiently high current density. Having once achieved this uncommon union for our portion of space, the electrons stick together until the marriage is violated by a sufficient quantity of conductor, where they are forced to return to their more common state as an atom. But while in this little package, whatever it is called, very delightful things happen that can be used to our advantage.
Cool.
At this point, all we have is a controllable entity capable of extraordinary thrust and using trivial control power. Some of the requirements for this condition seem to be connected to its large size, being larger than a single electron, and the apparent closeness of the substructure, assuming there are internal parts. Curiously, the critical number density of the substructure matches Avogadro's number. To a first approximation, parts within are spaced same as if they were in an atomic lattice. What's its name? Although there are many more measured properties having to do with the ability to mask charge and shift mass, the above statements used alone are enough to allow proceeding to the next stage of development without undue risk of the work being stranded for lack of data. Do we mystify the source of this effect with an elaborate name, or just give it a bland name and use it? There is now a wondrously long list of things we can do. Sorry, there is now a wondrously long list of things we do not have to know or do not or do to proceed with a process for passively overcoming force of gravity, as the entity we are talking about is thrusting against some unseen medium that appears stationary, and this medium is not the material it is boring through. Call it what you will, the medium is there, and we can now engage in it. So we can now engage it in a very forceful way. No more beating on the air or throwing material overboard to fly. Who cares what its name is? Use it.
That's awesome, isn't it, eh?
Yeah.
So he's, basically saying that this can be used for anti-gravitic properties, and indeed it is. With some of the technologies that Chris Beskar developed at Area 51, including the Hawk, the hybrid aerospace undersea craft. Before we go to there's just a few more slides that we're going to talk about. And before we go there, does anybody have any comments or anything? Chip, do you have anything to add?
No, I just kind of want to see it all before we talk a little about it.
Okay. Well then let's, I found 4 slides that sort of talk about things and how EVOs are used essentially. And these again came from David Wilcock and Stavati Aerospace. And this one is pretty shocking, actually.
The pineal gland creates an EVO every time you fall asleep. Do you want to talk about that, Eddie?
Yeah, anybody can jump in. Very, very interesting.
I could just read it through. Do you want me to read it through, or do we want to talk about it?
Well, let's talk about each one, because there's 4 of them, and they're just simple things here. So we know that this is when we do our greatest work. Sometimes is when we're either meditating or falling asleep. So interesting that EVOs are at action here.
So it's interesting. What is it about falling asleep that allows for these objects to be developed? What is going on in the pineal gland when you fall asleep? Well, I understand there are crystalline structures within the pineal gland. They give a resonance to the surrounding area and can cohere electric charges. I understand the basics there, but what is it about falling asleep stimulates EVO production, stimulates some change in the electric charge structure within the gland?
Wouldn't it be because it's at its peak performance?
Just Amber made a message saying someone's mic is on. Someone's like picking up a radio sound or something. So,
oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Lacey, what were you saying?
Oh, I was saying, I would assume it's because the pineal gland's function would be at peak when you're sleeping.
Yeah.
So what's the cause and effect? What's driving the creation of these charge clusters within the pineal gland? And why does it happen when you fall asleep? I'd argue that could happen in the middle of the day too.
If
Yeah.
you were meditating, perhaps, but
Yes,
I think maybe what you had said about resonance, perhaps, when we fall asleep and these processes start, that maybe the resonance is more pure because there's
yes,
less information coming
less
in.
noise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Less noise. Yeah,
Same thing happens when you meditate. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I was actually reading the new aerospace technologies paper. Um,
Yes.
and it was talking about just that everything's always in movement all the time. As long as matter exists, like we're always in movement, everything is.
Yeah.
And so my first thought, like when I looked at that, was that maybe it's able to enhance or create this EVO when it's at its peak time because we are not moving as fast like we are during the day. Like we're thinking about other things, stuff like that. I don't know. That's just like a little.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think you're right. We slow ourselves down, so I think that resonance becomes more pure, perhaps, and
How is the
stays.
EVO affecting the pineal gland? How is it influencing the pineal gland? Do we know that?
Well, I think that the pineal gland is creating these EVOs, right? So, um, and
And then
Amber wanted to
potentially,
say something. So Amber, hi Amber, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I think Lacey might be onto something about sleep because, and meditation too, because our brains have a certain, like our brain waves have a certain frequency when we're asleep and when we are meditating. I think it was something like it was like 7.8 hertz or something like that. I forget the name of it might be like something like called gamma waves or something like that. So that might
yeah,
have something to do with it, possibly.
yeah,
yeah,
The 7.8 hertz, so that might have something to do with it.
yeah, it's a Schumann resonance.
Just
Yeah.
yeah, just
yeah,
a thought.
yeah. And I think you're probably right. As we meditate, we go up into gamma range. I actually once, I think Lacey read this email. I once asked Rebecca Rose if she ever had her brain waves measured for gamma, because she is like an awesome remote viewer. And she said that she hadn't, but I think that at some point we might actually have to do an experiment and measure hers and a lot of others in this group, if we get the
No, Bern's got
technology.
his hand up. Do you want Bern? Do you
Yeah,
want to unmic yourself?
Yeah, hello everybody. You can hear me? Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
Um, from my perspective, there is this connection, this dimension shift in you from your subjective reality to your sensory inputs,
hmm,
and that's probably the point where you have a clearer signal when you're sleeping, because all meditation or real deep meditation, it's always especially in Kriya, it's always on this point where you work on this subjective feeling, and where you create your personal subjective reality from your signals. And in your sleep, all your sensory input is subdued.
yeah,
So I think it will probably have to do something with this. So if you at sleep, you have not so much sensory input, and this connection is clearer.
yeah,
And if you awake, you are in your personal subjective cycles, yes, and all this get distorted. So, and if you are in a deep meditation, you can also get access to it, and you probably you call it EVO, yes.
Yeah,
But I think you can understand what I'm trying to.
yeah, absolutely. I think like Chip was saying, there's less noise going
Yeah.
on. So like you said, your sensory inputs are less. That allows these things to occur. Yeah.
So what if, Ed, remember back this past Friday, we were talking about doing this with the vocal crystals in our meditation. What if something similar is happening within the pineal where we have these crystal structures? I don't know exactly what they are, but could they act as a proxy for something like a vocal crystal where we're cohering a resonance, a spatial resonance that creates a time crystal? And that time crystal
mhm.
is reciprocating. We know by the definition of a time crystal. And we're talking about, creating stiffness in the water in our bodies and all this stuff that Marcel Vogel was investigating. And if that does occur, maybe when you start to fall asleep, there's an imbalance in that temporal reciprocity that's occurring within these pseudo time crystals created in the pineal gland.
It
And
reminds me. It
time,
reminds me, Chip, of It reminds me of Roger Penrose's microtubules. Remember The
Mm,
Emperor's New Mind and the Shadows on the Mind. He thought microtubules in the. He was thinking what causes consciousness in the brain, and
yes,
someone told him about microtubules, and then Shadows of the Mind, the next book. He thinks that it has to be some kind of quantum effect of the microtubules are very small, and that
well,
these little
yes,
crystals, these little crystals kind of like produce thought. So it's
there,
microtubules are a quantum. He thinks it has to be a quantum thing or something beyond quantum mechanics and relativity. It has to be like the
there,
microtubules are a quantum effect that
there,
is
they're
important in
actually,
consciousness. So
yeah,
anyway,
Brendan, they're actually waveguides and there's phase conjugation going on there. So,
imagine
and
that.
yeah, imagine that. And then Chip, it's these time crystals are quasi crystals,
Yes.
right? And we actually have a show at some point again on quasi crystals from Stavati and David Wilcock that we can do because I have a whole bunch of
I
stuff
would
on
love
that.
to go there. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
we will for sure. Yeah.
right. And in our meditations, we've been talking about the microtubules being very resonant. And it would seem to
that's
be there an extended series of toroids, right? All glued
Hmm.
together with
that's the
very unique quantum characteristics that literally resonate and create tools that we could use in terms of leveraging our DNA to
that's
do
the
quantum jumping and conscious and a whole lot of other things. But back to the pineal gland, what if there was some slightly out of sync temporal resonance that occurs when we fall asleep? And Amber was talking about, squeezing time or dilating time or whatever, just for a few minutes. I'm looking for a way to create the damn charge clusters. And what if the engine room for creating this charge clustering phenomena has to do with some instability in the resonance of the time crystals themselves?
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about space here. I'm going to put time right down there on top of consciousness. And space is on top of time. Therefore, time is more important. That's why we keep driving. I keep driving down to that point. And at the point of falling asleep, you create some quantum asymmetry, slight asymmetry, maybe in the M tubes and in the the time crystal, the lyotropic water that occurs where you have some slight liquid crystal formation and some stiffness and permeability
Yeah.
issues all start to begin to form in the water in our bodies. And so what is creating that charge imbalance and clustering for just a few minutes, then that then that then
Um.
I guess equilibrates over time as you continue to fall asleep and or recharges when you have lucid dreams or some other thing that obviously require a very high level of quantum synchronicity.
Um.
Um,
I would suggest that the key to all of this stuff, you kind of mentioned it a little bit there, is the wobble. Because
Yes.
if you want to really learn how to control this stuff, you have to learn about the cycles of precession and understand that everything that's spinning has a slight wobble to it. And when we can phase lock on the wobble like we do in an MRI machine, for example, now some really magical, cool stuff can happen essentially.
Yes, and
And
I've read
yeah,
some good papers that just
yeah,
say exactly the same thing. That wobble is so important. So that's
yeah.
what I'm talking about in some kind of an asymmetric reciprocity that's going on within the pineal gland.
I think
And
the permittivity of space, you basically, when you change that, that's where you end up with this asymmetry. Itself, right? It creates all this stuff. That's
yes,
what I believe.
yeah, you would
Yeah.
have to create a momentary imbalance to create these charge clusters, I think.
So let's see what the next one says, Brandon, because I think it does talk about meditation, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
As you breathe into a meditation, your EVO gets more and more powerful.
So I think as you're focusing your intent on meditating, this is producing more and more of these EVOs and spinning them up faster and faster is what I think
So,
is
so
going
the
on here.
EVOs have a kind of consciousness link. That they
Mm.
are, I mean, you
Well,
could think of
ab-
everything as, I mean, in some ways you could think of
absolutely.
everything as consciousness, but the
Yeah.
EVOs
If
are kind of like,
Well, Brendan, if we go
go on.
back to the etheron being the the consciousness, then the electron is just a fractal of just a bigger
EVO
consciousness.
could be like a more higher form of consciousness. Could be a kind of more elevated form of consciousness compared to the other consciousness. If everything is consciousness,
Mm,
then
I,
EVOs could be a specific type of consciousness or something like that, or a
no,
particular, a kind
I
of a
believe
purer form of consciousness, maybe, or something.
no, I believe that etherons are again, in the definition from Paul Lavette, are actual consciousness themselves. And as you move up the fractal tape into electrons, and remember that EVOs are just a cluster of electrons that are spun up essentially, right? So what you said about them, being the consciousness themselves, that is true. And even when you move up into ball lightning, it's just different fractal sizes of everything essentially, right?
So one consciousness is like a cup, another consciousness is like a book, or another consciousness might be
Mm,
a phone or something. So
no, I think
those.
it's all the same, but just different frequencies. Yeah, you have to think of consciousness as all one and the same, but when all of this stuff happens, it's just different frequencies of things being assembled together, right?
Would you agree that, um, like going off of that, like we're all fractals of essentially the same source,
Absolutely.
but just
Beautiful.
individualized at different frequencies?
Yeah, exactly. Because I think our goes back to our density or the frequency of our DNA has a lot to do with all of this as well, too, right? Ultimately, it might have everything to do with it all,
Because
along
they
with the connection to the Schumann frequency, which is the consciousness of Earth. And then we also have the consciousness or the heliosphere of the sun, which is another consciousness. And then after that, you have the whole consciousness of the mother star, which is the Milky Way or Nataru, right? So
Yeah,
you
entire
get these
galaxy.
get different levels,
and the
right?
brain is supposed to do different things. One part of the brain is for hearing, another part is to do with sight. And I mean, I was listening to James Horrocks one time, who died a few years ago. He was talking about a lot of different things, and he was saying that that if people, when shamans can do an operation on you, if this guy fell out of a tree in a shaman tribe and he damaged his head, and the shamans, he was damage. The shamans did an operation where they cut most of his brain out, so it's just a brain stem, and he was still very conscious. Another guy, there was a general, took off his hat. He had no brain there, and he was like a genius at mathematics and music. So that could be a phantom brain, like a phantom brain. So
I,
one part of the brain is for sight, one other is for counting, another part is for reading and writing, another part is for feeling. So the EVOs are doing something, they're doing something that's important, is what you're saying, isn't it? A bit like enabling hearing or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Can I make a comment?
I think what Brendan is trying to get at here is there is a local frame of consciousness, I believe. At the very same time, we're always connected to a cosmic level of consciousness.
yeah.
And what's so interesting about having a local frame of consciousness, we can do some shit with our DNA on demand. And
Definitely.
so this slide here that we're looking at, breathe into your meditation, Marcel Vogel was all over that stuff. And yes, there's a Vogel quartz crystal involved in between everything, but I'm trying to use that as a proxy for what's in our pineal. Find that very interesting. And if we can, like Brendan says, we can turn on our DNA radio. If we can summon EVO clustering on demand and drive manifestation and reality on demand with our DNA and move through quantum jumps of consciousness. And yes, there's lots of consciousness fractalized between a local frame and the cosmic level. If we can do that on demand, we're freaking golden. And from what I've been told,
We can.
we are supposed to be able to do precisely that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think
Focus and intention, like Mary is just saying. Yeah, absolutely. The most important thing, because then you form the vertical time that is our potentials, you might say. And then as you follow them through into horizontal time, that's when they actually manifest into our reality, essentially, right?
Full three-dimensional time.
Yeah. Yeah. So cool. Someone else was about to jump in there and have a comment.
yeah, I was just going to say that I think that like twins are a really good example of why the microtubules or whatever structure within the brain acts like an antenna, because when you have twins that have a very similar DNA foundation, like people just accept that like twins have a sort of sixth sense about what is going on with the other. They might have, share some kind of experiences. And I just think that's a really good example that they're tuning into almost the same frequency. So there's like crosstalk between the two of them. And so this is why they have a sense of telepathy and all that people just accept without really thinking too much about it. But I think that that's just a really good example of how the channels that they're tuning into are extremely similar, and their DNA has basically just instructed their body to grow a particular type of fractal antenna within their brain. And it's so similar that they're getting a little bit of like sort of consciousness crosstalk there.
I absolutely agree. I have a brother and sister that are twins, and yeah, they can be a world apart and still know what each other's thinking, essentially. And they're not identical twins either. When they're identical twins, it's even more so what you were just describing, right? Yeah. Very, very good point. Let's see what the next one says, Brendan. I think there's just a couple more.
A suggestion here, Ed, we can throw all of these into PowerPoint, and there's a scaler on the bottom and right hand side of PowerPoint to blow them up so we can see them.
Yeah. I could probably do that for next time. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yes.
You can then attract EVOs from the surrounding environment.
Yes.
Wow. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Right. I guess as we meditate too, so we're probably producing these EVOs, and then we're also attracting them from the surrounding environment. And I think that in all the processes that we use, this is actually occurring, right?
Yeah, that's the old 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah.
Resonance.
Yeah, again, yeah.
Lacey wants to say something.
Yeah.
Yeah, this actually reminds me of that one demonstration with those two circles that come together. So light frequencies are going to attract towards each other. So this only makes sense, that we are attracting things and certain people and situations that are equivalent or close to our frequencies, because like frequencies tend to gravitate towards each other. That's why it said that either electrons or charged clusters don't like being alone.
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a great point, because you'll find with people, you'll have a certain person that you resonate with more than others. And of course that's that's really cool. Very great thought.
Could also explain that self-assembly characteristics of activities and operations within the quantum vacuum. What Lacey's saying basically is the frequency compatibility is non-destructive by definition. And that again was a very difficult thing that Einstein went through in my discussion of where does implosive compression go? Why doesn't the charge destroy itself?
Right.
Converting from an EMF shearing field to a longitudinal scalar field. Why is it not destructive? And so Lacey's touching on something that I think everything's frequency, right?
Yep.
Yeah, even my dad told me that, and he talked to a lot of ETs over the years. And so that's the engine room.
Mm-hmm.
And we can cohere it.
When some of the mystics talk about, like Ramana Maharshi was saying, when they talk about everything being, so you can see as everything as illusion, and you can also see it as consciousness. So in a sense, but they say, they're saying that the world is an illusion. They're just consciousness exists. So it's a bit paradoxical. Anyway, when you start trying to understand truth and things, it gets a bit paradoxical. So on one level, it's all consciousness. Another way of looking at it is it's illusion and just the consciousness that you have and all other sentient beings. Those sentient beings could be atoms and electrons and photons. Could also be so all the sentient beings have consciousness, and then so it's just in Advaita Vedanta they're saying just the self exists. The self is all that exists, and everything else is illusion. And but when you're in that enlightened state, you don't see anything as not. Everything is enlightened. You see everything as enlightened. You don't see any unenlightened beings. So it's a bit paradoxical because language is limited. Language is dualistic, so it's limited. It can't really explain these kind of like enlightenment level, this kind of like enlightened truth very well. So a lot of these saints like Ramana Maharshi, they weren't logical. I think David Godman was saying the thing about these enlightened beings is that when they speak to you, they don't always make logical sense. They say one thing and then they say another thing. So everything is enlightened, everything is illusion, and only the consciousness is that self-consciousness, or everything is a consciousness. So it gets a bit paradoxical, anyway, but
well, I think Brendan, the efforts that Leonard Susskind have made here in the last 20 some years or 30 years around a holographic universe. I think it's Western science and culture that's trying to explain what the Eastern mysticisms are saying.
Bingo.
And so a holographic universe I take as being the metamaterial is there and it coheres and resonates into reality when you put your intention on it. Like Schrodinger with his freaking cat in a box. The same bizarre aspect of quantum mechanics is constantly creating reality from this soup of unassigned conscious fractals.
So
so the holographic universe is, well, everybody's been to Disneyland.
Each part contains a whole. Each part contains a whole in a hologram, isn't it? So
exactly, everybody's seen the dancing witch at Disneyland. and you look right through it, and these are just pieces and elements that come together, and your mind puts the whole image together.
Like the universe in a grain of sand, an eternity in an hour. You know, remember that poem? I've forgotten who was.
Yeah,
But
and those are nuggets. We've been told this for many
if
thousands
we
of
are
years.
if we are like
You
the
know,
drop, if we are like the drop, if we are like the drop of water, if we're like the drop, when the drop of water meets the ocean, is it still the drop or is it the ocean? Because
Yeah.
we're like our soul is a bit like a drop, but when the drop of water meets the river and the river meets the ocean, is it still the drop or is it the ocean? So the source is like the ocean, and when we merge with the source, then we become we become the ocean. Because
that's the essence of the confusion around this conscious quantum universal state where everybody's consciousness exists. As a matter of fact, it's funny you mentioned the drop of water. When I meditate, I actually view myself as being a drop of water falling into a still ocean and merging with this universal consciousness. I'm there, but I still have a fractalized identity of some kind. And maybe it's like Lacey says, slightly different frequency, maybe just a few hertz that differentiates me. But as a whole, I'm still a part of that ocean. Always.
So it might be fair to say that as we focus our intent, it's actually these EVOs, again, the clutch that engages the ether, that actually is causing reality to come into fruition.
Exactly why they're so fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the rubber on the road, I think. I think, wow.
And again, thank you, Chris Beskar and Ken Shoulders and Bob and John Hutchison too, right? Because he's all part of this as well. So I think there's just one more, Brendan. I can't remember what it said. And I just was flipping through stuff this morning, and I found this this morning before we went on to do this, and I just thought it was really interesting how it all kind of fits in.
an EVO is a portal to the spirit world. Okay, that helps me understand what the EVO is doing in the brain, you know, a bit more, you know. So
Yep. Isn't
as a
that
portal.
quite the statement?
Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Yep. Lacey, what do you think about that?
Don't think much, just right off the top of your head.
Well, I was actually just saying that charge clusters or EVOs access etherons that access essentially sentient consciousness, which is also in us. Which yes, it is sentient. So yeah, that's kind of like what my initial thought on that was.
Yeah, very cool.
How about
As
Amber?
like the spirit world goes, I would say that that's also kind of like I feel like we are still I would say the spirit world is kind of like odd to me because I feel like we're all still one and the same. Like we are in the spirit world essentially right now because, you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Definitely.
it's just like the spirit world is maybe a more refined form of physicality. You know, it's more. I mean, it just means that you maybe come out of your body, go through a tunnel, and you're in another realm. It's just another realm. Like going, it could be like going to the moon or going to Mars or somewhere. It's just somewhere which is not of. I mean, I think the universe, the source, and the universe are like one and the same. But it's like going to. There's just a different. There's a different sort of there's a different sort of stage. There's a different type of physicality. It's not just the physical where you can touch things. There's another type of physicality which is more refined, and that is the spirit world. And with this, it's just the soul or the spirit is indestructible. So you have always existed, and you always will exist. You just transfer, and death is just a path. It's just a transference to some other form, to some other,
Yeah.
and we all return to the source eventually.
That's
mean,
because, yeah, exactly, because we're all fractals of source.
the source is
So
indestructible.
not,
I mean, it's
yeah,
kind of like we are helping the creator or the source to create.
yeah.
So they can
And
become even more. So language can't explain it. So people think the source is perfect. Well, it's becoming. It's a learning of the source is learning, evolving. It's becoming more and more perfect, more and more great, more and
what you
more humble. You know, it's gonna be. So it's we are. So you could say that there's an end. There's a state where everything will become truly enlightened. But it's just longer. We could then decide to start again from the beginning all
you
over
know,
again. But we would have remembered what we'd learned from the source. We would retain what we'd learned.
oh,
So anyway,
definitely.
but
That would
so
be nice
You
if we
said that,
remembered.
so if we start all again from the beginning again, we
Yeah, if
will
we
have
remembered,
remembered.
it'd be
We will
nice.
retain what we had learned from the source. So it'll be a better beginning. So
so
it's better. There are things that are better than this. What we have here, there's things that are better, much better than this. There's things that
so
are more perfect and that
so
are
Brendan,
eternal. You know. Okay, go on.
one of the things that you said is we eventually return to source. Well, that's not actually kind of technically correct, because when we pass through the door, we directly connect to source, because we're all fractals of source. There's no heavens that we have to go through or
No.
realms that we have to go through. We're all a fractal of source, so we go back to source. We have our self evaluation. It's not judgment, it's our self
No.
evaluation. And then we pick another mission and
Yeah.
we move on. And before we get into this lifetime, we already know the mission that we've chosen and
Yeah,
the
so it
people
gets,
that
but
we've
what I'm saying
chosen.
is it gets
Right?
better. It doesn't, it's not when things are the worst or mediocre or not so good here. Just remember, it gets much better than this. There is a place like the source and the spirit world where
Yeah,
things are understandable and they're much better than this, you know. So and it
yeah.
makes everything makes sense, you know. So
And as what we're trying to do here as star seeds, especially, is try to raise the vibrational level of ourselves and wake up other star seeds. But we're also bringing the whole vibrational level of the consciousness up with us, and that's part of our mission. So, does
And if
anybody
I,
else have any comments, and then
there's,
we'll stop.
Lacey,
yeah, there's,
Lacey's got her hand up. What do you
Okay.
want to
yeah,
speak
let's,
first?
before we do that, I wanted to ask if Amber had any incipient thoughts on this last slide. Anything come to mind, Amber, that you wanted to comment on? Because this is an interesting crossover.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about the spiritual world, you're talking about levels of consciousness, and there are many different levels of consciousness. And I wanted to know from the young folks if they have any instinctive thoughts on this kind of thing, because this is the generic way of discussing for centuries or for thousands of years what we were doing. The spiritual world is really a generic term for multiple levels of consciousness that go all the way back up to source. Any thoughts on that, Amber?
No, Lacey had a hand up, and also what was the name?
Yeah,
I think it was Bernard, but Bernd.
Sure.
Barrett's had his hand up. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
So I guess it kind of makes sense because it has like the EVO as a portal and it as a portal to the spirit world. It kind of makes sense considering it has like, it's so small, which, you don't really think about it, as being important, but it's so small meaning it's close to like the quantum and the
Yes.
Planck level, the quantum level, and it's close to the ether level, which I think we're kind of
Hmm.
leaning towards the ether level being like, sub-quantum kinetics and stuff like that. So
And
that might be, yeah. So I'm thinking that might be where the spirit world or the spirit realm might be. It might be residing within the ether. It might be, or it might actually be the ether. I'm not sure.
ethereal means of the spirit, of the spiritual. Ethereal means of the
Yeah.
spiritual.
Well,
Um,
there you go.
um,
So that's what I'm thinking, that like the EVO being a portal to that makes sense because it's really, really close to that Planck level, to that quantum size, because it's really, really small. And it kind of makes sense that it would kind of like give us access once that's activated. It would give us that access. So that does make
it's a
sense
tool.
to me.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what
So
Amber's talking about to a certain extent is scale and how important that is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Crossing the veil from classical physics to nanophysics, scale is important, but you would still expect the underlying operations to be very similar or dependent on each other. And so going down to the spiritual world, yes, would be at the foundation.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
what was that,
and
Chip?
that's
Yes, like the consciousness, pure consciousness is foundational. So it's like
Yes.
the
I mean, that's
fundamental level is pure
absolutely.
consciousness.
It
You
is.
know,
Yeah, I
so
know Don,
yes.
guys like Don Hoffman been talking about that lately and doing some math and saying it can be no other way. The probabilities are
Mhm.
so impressively high that consciousness is the greatest technology in the universe and at the base of the whole freaking pyramid.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Lacey, you had some comments too?
Oh, I was just gonna say regarding the how everything, the perfection of everything, I would actually say that even though I would say everything is perfect altogether, I would say everything right now that is in existence is perfect,
yeah,
even though because we essentially choose to come here, like Ed
Mhm.
said, we have a mission and our goals are essentially to uplift ourselves to higher levels of consciousness. So even though somebody may be going through a rough patch, that's still perfection because that's going to get you where you need to be.
Mm.
And
Beautifully
I
said.
also
Yeah.
feel like everything like to scale, like I kind of think about this in like a golden ratio kind of way of like everything is going to strive towards the golden ratio. And that doesn't just include your smallest, the smallest thing you can possibly measure. It includes the largest thing you can possibly measure as well.
Yeah.
Which I mean, the possibilities are infinite, and it's just, you know, it's literally just an infinite um cycle. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a transfer function, maybe Ed, where you're looking at ways to get from classical physics down to nanophysics. And that transfer function, that scalability is is the operators on that transfer function are clearly these kinds of objects, these EVO objects,
Yeah.
where you can torque the bejesus out of the vacuum for very small periods of time at very small scalable levels that can, like Lacey says, through golden ratio, super heterodyne
Yeah.
to much, much broader frequency spectrums that cover classical,
Yeah. And
experience as well as nano experience.
and the other
Wow.
thing to remember too here is Ken Childers was working with charge clusters to pack more and more and more energy into smaller and smaller packets for various reasons. But I was talking to Lacey about it and saying that it's it's energy that they were packing in there too. But the other way you can look at it is it's information. So information can be stored and packed in here at very high densities as well too, right? So
Yes, and that information is introspective. It is self-aware.
yeah,
It is self-limiting, blah, blah, blah. And
yeah,
therefore it is conscious.
yeah,
And in many cases, sentient.
yeah, exactly, right. So it just goes to show us why we are spending the time to go through the Ken Shoulders papers to learn about EVOs more, because there's some great, great nuggets in all of this information. And yeah, there's this last slide that basically shows EVOs being created and being put out there essentially.
yeah. There's been a number of sort of philosophers. I'm not sure if it's Spinoza that was taught that everything is perfect. You know, because in a
Hmm.
sense, they say that the Egyptians thought that you could learn in the spirit world. You didn't have to come back. You could learn. You don't have to come back to the earth plane. You can learn. You can stay in the spirit world and learn in the spirit world. It just takes longer because you're having such a fun time there and such a good time there that it just takes longer to learn. Whereas here, there's more obstacles and things can go wrong. Blah blah blah. So it's because of the obstacles on the Earth is thought to be one of the most difficult schools in the universe. So
Truth there.
so that because it's potentially it's not. I mean, nowadays with the internet and a lot of other things, I think life is a lot easier in some ways and a bit more tricky in others. But
Yeah.
because of the difficulties of the Earth plane, you learn much quicker. And that's the sense. In a sense, it's perfect because the perfection side of it is that you learn very quickly on the Earth plane. In the spirit world, it takes longer because you're having such a fun time and it's so easy going that it takes
Yeah.
Well,
longer to
and
learn. But sorry.
to add on to that, imagine just being in the spirit world for, the entirety of existence. Like that's pretty boring, to be
Yeah, yeah.
honest.
They say that you wouldn't
We
appreciate
want
why.
to be challenged. We want to be challenged.
Yeah,
And
Yeah.
so,
that's
yeah.
right. You wouldn't appreciate the light unless you'd experienced the dark. We come here to experience the light and the dark, but in the spirit world, is more or less only it's the light, and it's great and it's very nice and everything. But if you just knew only the light, you after a while you wouldn't necessarily appreciate it so much. So by coming here, we experience the dark, and then we can appreciate the light much more. So
But the
um,
the dark
but
and the light they typically come in every scenario. Like you said about
Yeah.
technology, it makes things really easy, but it also causes a lot of like really deep complications
yeah,
to kind of almost the same scale if you really think about it.
and
We have
also
all the knowledge, all of the conscious knowledge at our fingertips, but the toxicity of being in front of a screen, it's like
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, it's all
And then
about that.
when one's reached more mature levels, more advanced to the master level and the advanced masters, then they've learned all these lessons. So they can just stay on the spirit side and appreciate it. They don't have to come back to learn lessons. So they've learned all the lessons. They're just going to more advanced masters, so they can stay on the spirit side and they don't get bored of it or they don't take it for granted because they've been on the Earth plane and other planets and they've learned all the lessons so they can appreciate they can stay on. I mean, some of the masters do come back. Apparently it's supposed to be rarer, but some of them
Right.
do come back to Earth to sort of like, but they don't need to come back because they've learned all the lessons, but they come back to help people out. So
Well, I
like the saint,
appreciate
maybe like the
everyone.
saints or the sages or things like this.
Yeah. I appreciate everyone for being here and focusing all of our intent on learning about EVOs or exotic vacuum objects, charge clusters from Ken Shoulder's research and others. Again, so I think we can probably stop the recording now, Brandon, and we can carry
Okay,
on with
thank
more
you, Eddie, and
stuff.
everyone else.
Yeah,
Thank you, everyone, for
thank you.
listening. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Cheers. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.